Hey, how's it going?
Great. Sounds great. What exact time? We are close to 2 a.m. now, right?
2:08 a.m. Yeah, but it's okay. The sun never sets on the Founder Institute. We live in a global economy. So
Awesome. So, well, if you could just give us a quick background about yourself, and then we can hear about your topic.
yeah, sure. So I'm Jonathan Greechan, co-founder and CEO of the Founder Institute. As Namal mentioned, it's a global pre-seed startup accelerator. I would consider myself a startup lifer. I've been working in startups now since 2004. Been through a couple up and down cycles, and the one time a startup that I was involved in building, we got acquired by a big company, and I spent a year at that big company, and I don't think I've ever been as depressed in my entire life. So I'm where I belong in the startup space, and I'm blessed to be a part of the ecosystem.
Awesome. So Jonathan, great to hear about Founder Institute. You guys are a great global ecosystem. You're building cities, you're building startup accelerators, and you're also building VC labs. So there's so much happening. We'd like to hear more about that and what are your takes on funding scene going forward.
Yeah, for sure. So I'll bring up my presentation really quick.
Brilliant.
Here.
That'll be great.
Yeah, as Namal mentioned, it's not just Founder Institute, but actually in 2020, we actually spun out something from Founder Institute, a sister company called VC Lab. And VC Lab is actually, we take the same principles of Founder Institute that we use to help founders launch great startups. And in VC Lab, we do that for emerging fund managers to help them launch new VC funds. So we've now launched over 225 funds through VC Lab. And obviously there's great synergies there between those funds and the companies coming through FI. But I guess awesome. I know I don't have a lot of time, and you guys have a really amazing packed schedule here. So I'll get started on what I'm here to talk about today. And that's really raising funding in 2023. So I want to start up really quick with just a kind of a reality check, a perception versus reality in the market, okay? Because if you look at all of the news that's coming out, whether it's news that's specifically about venture capital, or it's news about tech stocks, or it's news about, I don't know, Sam Bankman-Fried or whatever, which is kind of being lumped in with tech when it really shouldn't be. It's just straight up financial fraud. You would think that the bottom is really falling out of the bottom of everything going on in startups and venture capital, right? But really, if you look at the perception versus reality, you would think that the market for startup funding is really bad, but really it's just the market for startup funding has dropped compared to 2021. And 2021 was insane, okay? All of those headlines that I just showed you before, it's all like, oh, it's dropped since 2021, it's dropped to 2019 levels, right? As if that was such of a bad thing. 2021 should not be used as a barometer for anything, all right? If you really think about it, this is going to be a time that we remember. You look on the left chart here, will just show you the amount of venture funding that was going into the market was insane. And on the right here, you'll see that a lot of that venture funding was coming from non-traditional VCs, right? These are large private equity firms, pension funds, people like Tiger Global, right? Basically, a lot of these big LPs were like, look, we don't even need the VCs anymore. We can just skip the middleman and go straight to the startups because everybody's making money on startups. So what could go wrong, right? And on top of that, if you look back, I think to me, it's kind of funny that even the term, the Great Resignation, and that whole concept sort of became normalized. I mean, if you think about it, this is also kind of insane. It became normalized because everything last year was insane. But the idea that mass amounts of people would just start quitting their jobs, if that's not a sign of just how crazy and how much of an outlier 2021 was, I'm not sure what is. So just everything's okay. We're not bottoming out or anything. We're going back to like 2019 pre-pandemic levels, which were fine, which were great levels, just not insane like 2021. If you look at a lot of statistics, US VCs raised 70 billion in the first quarter of 2022, which was more than all of 2021, even though 2021 was crazy. And if you're going to compare, I know a lot of people think we may be going into a recession, and we may be. But the amount of that funding was in the last major recession we had in all three of those years combined. And then there's the topic of dry powder, which a lot of people are talking about. All of this froth from the last couple of years brought a lot of venture capital, or a lot of just capital into the VC space that has yet to be invested. Okay, and that money has to go somewhere. People don't give VCs money to just sit on it. If they wanted to do that, they would put it into some other slow investment, right? That money needs to be invested. So, it's the bottom is not dropping out. Everything's okay. All right. And then the second perception versus reality, I would say here, is people think that valuations are dropping like crazy. They're not. Late stage valuations are dropping. Everything else is mostly okay. Those late stages, I'm not going to lie, it's been kind of a bloodbath. And that's why you're seeing so many layoffs across the board. And a lot of that is also because, guess what? Some of those non-traditional VCs that decided to skip the middleman and go straight to the startups, maybe that wasn't such a great idea, right? A lot of them are losing their shirts right now. So a lot of that pullback is now causing a lot of the valuations that were just completely unrealistic in those late stage startups to get cut. But if you look at the earlier stages, which I believe most of the people joining this event today are, it's really our domain. Angel tends to just be stable across the board. And you can see on this chart, right? That never really changes too much. And that's still the same. Seed deals are actually rising right now, which to me also isn't too surprising, because as those late stage investors started coming into the market and flooding their capital, a lot of the traditional late stage VCs raised massive funds to start going earlier, right? To become more competitive. So a lot of those seed stage deals are actually growing. And even Series A deals, this to me, I'm not going to lie, is kind of surprising. Even some of those are, somewhat stable, right? I do expect some of these to drop a little bit, but even those are somewhat stable. So really what we're seeing is that fundraising is it's a return to the fundamentals, okay? 2021 was not normal. It should not be used as a barometer for anything, all right? We're returning back to normal levels. And this is kind of a funny way that I like to frame it, right? I was in that VC funding market in the 2000s, and I got treated not very well. And that was the motivation for myself and my co-founder to start a website called thefunded.com, and then subsequently the Founder Institute, right? And I think this God complex here, that's an RIP 2000s, okay? We don't have that anymore. But if you look on the other side of the equation, kind of 2020, 2021, that's just as bad, right? Yes, it was easier for some founders to get funding, but it's terrible for the industry, right? In the long run. So right now we're literally just kind of getting back to this nice equilibrium, which is sanity, right? It's the early conversation. What are your traction? What is your unit economics? Come back to me next month. I want to see how you do there. Right? This is healthy for the industry, and this is where we are now. So quickly, I want to go into just these 4 major fundraising trends that I'm seeing for 2023 that should help anyone here kind of increase their chances of raising funding. So number 1, as I mentioned, we're kind of going back to pre-pandemic. So let's call that 2019 or so, which was still a great time to raise funding, right? And we just released some of these statistics, and you can see them on fi.co/benchmarks. But basically, we just started sharing some of the data that we're seeing with all the deals that we're seeing around the world. And if you look at a lot of this stuff, it really is just going back to kind of common sense benchmarks, things that we saw before 2019, before kind of these other factors like FOMO and things like that started coming into play, and creating unrealistic valuations and unrealistic funding rounds. The second thing that I'll say here, and this is also tracked on fi.co/benchmarks, is that metrics are great again. Okay, so investors are getting under increased scrutiny to mitigate risk, right? And what is a great way to mitigate risk? Well, the best way to do that really is to eliminate bias. And what's a great way to eliminate bias is to focus on metrics, right? To be quantitative, to be data driven. So this is some of the latest data that we're seeing that's kind of meeting this ever changing definition of quote unquote traction, right? Which is a word that can mean a lot of different things, and it's sort of always moving. This is something we just updated a couple of days ago, but maybe next month it'll be different. But really, it's just focusing on being able to do these things is what's going to help you get funding. And really, at the end of the day, it's this idea of being resourcefulness it's valuable again. Okay, like you don't need to have all the money in the world. You just whatever money you do have, you need to just make it go a long way so that you can show an investor, look what I've been able to do. No matter what it is, look what I've been able to do with the little amount of resources that I have. Imagine you gave me some more resources. You just threw some gas on this Kindle, on this little flame that I have. Imagine the fire that could create. Right. This is typically how investor conversations have always happened. In the last couple of years, that's been it's been diluted a little bit, but just we're getting back to this resourcefulness is better than resources mentality. The third one is that grit is great again. Okay, raising a round of funding is hard. All right, and I can tell you right now that you're gonna need to get 100 no's and tweak your pitch about 50 times before you're going to get a yes. And a lot of these numbers got skewed the last couple of years as well. And just, this is really hard to do. Okay. It's like banging your head against the wall. I know one of our top mentors, he used an analogy. It was that Tom Cruise movie, Edge of Tomorrow, right? He said raising, and this guy has raised billions of dollars in venture capital. And what he said was raising VC is like, it's like that movie. Every day, you just try to get a little bit farther and then you get killed, but you learn a little bit, and then the next day you just go a little bit farther again and then you get killed and you learn a little bit more. You just keep right. It's just it's hard. All right, so these are the requirements that we were saying in 2019, and these are the requirements that we're saying again. It's really hard to get 100 no's, and this filters out probably 95% of the people right here. Just this grit, just this perseverance, just this determination. And it definitely is required again. And then the last thing I'll say here on the trends is just, a heightened scrutiny on team. So again, the diligence requirements are going to be going up. And one of the, with any business, there's going to be risk factors, right? Maybe, just maybe, there should have been some heightened scrutiny on the FTX team. Maybe people there should have had a vast experience in financial compliance or running a multinational sophisticated financial exchange, right? Maybe that wouldn't be a terrible idea. Basically, every single business has what I would call this 800-pound gorilla in the room. Any startup pitch that I hear, right? And some of them are obvious, right? Some of them are, okay, if you're any kind of B2C company, I'm really going to press and want to know how you are going to acquire customers at scale, right? If you're a SaaS company, I want to know what are your sales cycles, who on your team has experience building out those sales teams, managing those sales cycles, and actually getting into the room with right people and closing those deals, right? Every business has these 800-pound gorillas. Some of them are obvious, like the ones that I just mentioned, but some of them you really won't know them until you just start pitching. All right, and the best way to mitigate those 800-pound gorillas or those massive risk factors to investors is through your team. All right, so make sure those are mitigated by the skill sets on your team, and to some extent, advisors can be seen as an extension of your team and can kind of fill some of those gaps. We have a founder advisor standard template, basically a free legal agreement at fi.co/fast if you are looking to build out your advisory team. And in terms of bringing on team members, 2023 will mark the largest migration of talent from large tech companies to startups that we have ever seen. All right, we've already seen the massive amount of layoffs that have happened. Those people are getting laid off to no fault of their own. They're getting laid off because of massive valuations and because of all of this kind of chicanery in late stage VC and things like that. tons of talented people are now looking at a not great job market, which is an amazing opportunity for startups to bring on talent and to fill a lot of those gaps. All right. I think this is really going to be the biggest trend of 2023. And as a startup, you should be trying to take advantage of that. It should be one of your top priorities. All right. And one final note here, Namol, I'm starting, I can hear the orchestra playing just by looking into your eyes. We may be going into a recession, we may not, okay? But I know from experience, Founder Institute was established in April of 2009. If you look at this chart, it literally was at the very, very bottom, okay? Other companies that were started during that last major recession, I mean, look at this list. You can group it all together. It was the fintech companies that defined the last decade in technology. It was the gig economy. It was the sharing economy. It was, I mean, just look at every single one of these. These were the category defining companies of the last decade in tech were built during that last economic downturn, right? And if you go back to around the 2000 to 2002, 2003 time period, you're going to see the same thing for the companies that define the previous decade in tech, right? You're talking the Facebooks and things like that. So this is, if we do go into a recession, it still is a great time to launch a business. It's actually the best time to launch a business because entrepreneurs thrive in disruption. During a recession, all these massive companies right now, right? The people that would be your so-called competitors, the large businesses that you're trying to pick off customers from, right now, they're sorting through their books, they're dealing with layoffs, they're restructuring, they're doing all these things. They're going to move even slower than they normally move as a big company, right? New problems are being created. Entrepreneurs thrive during these times. Entrepreneurs thrive in disruption. And this is why you always see during these times of economic turmoil, when you look back a couple of years later, that's when the companies are being created. And you'll look back in 2030, the companies that define the tech industry then are being formed or scaled right now. So I encourage you, if you're kind of looking at a recession, using that as an excuse to not get started, like you need to flip that around 180 degrees if you want to be in the right mindset as an entrepreneur. All right. Thank you very much. And just a couple of the links that I shared there, that benchmarks, fi.co/benchmarks, and that FAST agreement to get advisors is at fi.co/fast.
Thank you so much, Jonathan. What an inspiring and powerful keynote. And I kind of related back to Magnus Grimlund was here in our last event. So he did the opening keynote, and his take was also that this is the best time to build a startup. So I think with so much talent coming in, and then your points on return to 2019 metrics, great scrutiny on the team. I think great messages for startup teams out there. Thank you so much for joining in. And